The room is quiet now, and the night has that slow, rainy patience to it. Streetlights humming, windows softly ticking as they cool. You're on the late shift with me, the sleepless detective, letting the case files breathe the way old paper does. These are the kinds of crimes that look clever at first glance. A weird method, a neat little trick, a person trying to slip past forensic science like it is just another locked door. But forensics is not magic. It's ordinary work done gently, done twice, until the story stops arguing. So settle in, loosen your grip on the day, and let the strange details arrive on their own. One quiet mistake at a time. You learn this early. If you stay in the work long enough, the crimes that brag the loudest are usually the easiest to hear. The truly difficult ones do not announce themselves with theatrical flourishes. They sit quietly in a folder, smelling faintly of toner and old coffee, waiting for someone patient enough to read the same sentence twice. Tonight, you are not sprinting through alleys. You are not kicking down doors. You are doing what forensics actually is. Slow noticing. The kind of noticing that feels boring until it suddenly isn't. Because the strange methods people use to outsmart science are rarely scientific. They are emotional. They are superstition with a budget. You flip to the first page. The paper makes that soft, rasping sound, like dry leaves. And right away, you see the promise criminals always make themselves. If I do something weird enough, the system will blink. If I move the body, if I change the story, if I wipe the doorknob with bleach, the whole world will shrug and move on. It does not forever. Forensics is not a single test that screams the answer. It is a shelf of small answers. It is routine. It is repetition. It is the quiet courage of looking at a thing you do not want to look at, and then looking again. And you learn another truth, too. Most clever methods are just a person trying to control something that is already out of their control. Time, memory, paperwork, habit, the way a drop falls, the way a shoe bends, the way a lie changes shape when you tell it twice. You start with the late shift basics, the rainy night, the quiet case file, the cold coffee that tastes like regret, and burnt plastic. The city outside is wet and half asleep. Inside, your desk lamp makes a small island of light. And in that light, you begin to notice the first pattern. People think forensic science is like a flashlight in the dark. You click it on, and there is the truth, bright as a coin on the sidewalk. In real life, it is more like a sunrise you have to wait for. Slow, stubborn, inevitably revealing what was always there. Sometimes the weird method is simple, too simple. Someone tapes plastic over their shoes because they saw it in a movie. Someone pours cleaning fluid on a carpet until the house smells like a public pool at midnight. Someone scrubs a sink until it shines and then forgets the towel they used. They imagine the clean surface is the whole story, but you have walked enough rooms to know the absence of mess can be a mess. A room can be too tidy. A floor can be too clean. A life can be too carefully narrated. And that is where this collection starts. Not with a bang. With a small, quiet misunderstanding criminals have about how the world keeps records without trying. Because the first strange method is not bleach or fire or acid. It is the oldest trick in the book, the disappearing act. It always sounds romantic to them. Vanish, start over, become someone else, walk out of your own life, like you are slipping out of a coat. They think all they need is a different haircut, a different town, a different name, said with confidence. So, you open that file, you smell damp paper and cheap cologne stuck in the fibers, like the evidence room has its own memory. The case reads like a fable detectives tell each other when the night gets long. A man leaves his apartment on a Tuesday and does not come back. No note, no dramatic goodbye, just an empty bed, a half-charged phone left on the kitchen counter, and a sink with one dish in it. One dish is always the detail that makes you sigh, not because it is important, but because it is human. People do not run away from their lives and still leave a dish as if they are coming back after dinner. The first officers call it missing person. Adults are allowed to disappear, they say. People walk off all the time. They are right and also wrong. Because you are not looking for a vanished man. You are looking for the friction he left behind. You start where you always start, with what people do when no one is watching. You look at the boring parts: rent, utilities, paychecks, purchases, the little electronic breadcrumbs that most of us scatter without thinking, like pocket lint. This is where the weird method shows up. The man believed he could hide by going small. Not a new passport and a flight overseas. Just a move 2 towns over, under a cousin's name, paid in cash. He shaved his beard. He stopped using social media. He got a job in a warehouse where no one asked questions. Congratulations! He has successfully changed the surface. But the problem with surface changes is that you still have to live under them. You still have to exist in the same economy as everyone else. You still have to turn on lights and buy food and get to work on time. You still have to be warm when it is cold and fed when you are hungry. And those needs create records, even when you think you are being careful. You do not need to be a genius to follow them. You need patience. You need someone willing to request utility data, then wait. Someone willing to compare a list of addresses against a list of relatives. Someone willing to notice that the cousin suddenly has a new power bill in a town he has never lived in. It is not glamorous. It is filling out forms. It is the slow grind of getting approvals. It is waiting on hold while a tired clerk asks you to repeat the account number. But it works because people are creatures of routine, and routine is a leash. It is soft and it is long, but it tugs. In this file, the tug is small. A pattern of purchases at the same gas station, the kind of gas station with flickering lights, and a cashier who has seen everything and remembers nothing. Except the guy who always buys the same thing. Always. A cheap coffee, a pack of gum, a specific brand of cigarettes, the kind with the bright label that stands out on a receipt. You learn to love receipts. They are quiet witnesses. They do not get scared. They do not forget. They do not decide 10 years later that they want to be part of a story. They just sit there, ink fading, telling the same truth until someone listens. So you gather them, not dramatically, not all at once. One request at a time, one printout, one line item, and you notice something else. The man might have used cash, but he did not use only cash. No one does. Not forever. Cash is inconvenient. Cash is heavy. Cash runs out. At some point, comfort wins. People want direct deposit. People want a phone plan. People want to order something online at 2 in the morning and have it arrive in a box that makes them feel like the world is still normal. The file shows that moment. A prepaid phone bought with cash, activated with a name that is almost believable. Almost. It is one of those names people choose when they are lying. Too smooth, too generic, like it came from a character generator. And the phone pings the same set of towers, night after night, like a moth circling the same porch light. You do not chase it. You let it circle. You map it. Triangulation is a fancy word for a simple thing. You look at where the signal talks to the world. You mark it. You mark it again. You draw a shape. The shape becomes a neighborhood. The neighborhood becomes a street. Then you do the oldest forensic method of all. You go there and you look. There is rain on your coat. There is mud in the seams of your shoes. The street is quiet. Windows glow dimly behind curtains. A dog barks once, then decides you are not worth the effort. You stand across from a small rental house with a sagging mailbox. The name on the mailbox is not his. That is the point. But the curtains are the kind people pick when they do not plan to stay long. Temporary, cheap, like a disguise. You knock. Someone answers. It is him. The beard is gone. The hair is different. But the face is the face. Faces are stubborn. He looks at you like you are a ghost from his old life. In a way, you are. You are the part of the world that does not forget. And here's the part that is always less cinematic than people hope. He does not run. Most of them do not. He just blinks, and his shoulders sink, and his eyes do that tiny calculation people do when they realize the game is over. Because the weird method, hiding in plain sight, only works if nobody looks closely. And your job is to look closely. Even when it is boring, the file does not end with handcuffs and a dramatic confession. It ends with paperwork, interviews, explanations. A judge who has heard this story before in other forms. And if you are listening for the lesson, you hear it under the rain. Most perfect disappearances are undone by comfort and habit. People cannot help it. They want the same coffee, the same route, the same little treat at the end of a hard day. They want to be themselves, even while pretending not to be. You go back to your desk. You turn the page to another version of the same trick. This one is quieter, almost sweet in its stupidity. A woman reports her partner missing. She says he stormed out after an argument and never returned. She gives a timeline that feels rehearsed, but not polished, like she practiced in the mirror and got tired halfway through. She says she waited to call because she thought he would cool off. That part is believable. People do wait. Pride can be a delay, but then you start doing the calm checks, bank activity, transportation, friends, the phone. Nothing moves. No withdrawals, no messages, no little signs of life. And then you notice a purchase on her card. A cleaning machine rental, the kind used for deep carpet cleaning, the kind you get when you spill wine, or when you spill something else and you cannot bear the idea of a stain. You do not accuse. Not yet. Accusations are easy. Proof is slow. Proof is what lasts. So you ask her about it. She smiles too quickly and tells you she was freshening up. She says it with a brightness that does not match the rainy day outside. Congratulations, You have just heard the sound of a story trying too hard. You go to the house, the carpet smells like detergent, strong. It hits you in the throat. It is the smell of someone trying to erase a moment. The house is clean in a way that feels recently forced, like a person who cleans when they are nervous. And then you find the quiet detail. Not blood, not a weapon, something more ordinary. The vacuum bag, or the canister, or the trash bin outside, heavy with damp fibers and dirty water dumped out too late. People forget the aftermath of their own cleaning. They think the clean room is the finish line. But cleaning creates waste. Waste is evidence. Evidence is patient. You send it to the lab. The lab does not gasp. The lab does not play dramatic music. The lab logs it, labels it, and tests it like it has tested 1,000 other things. They look for trace, tiny things that do not wash away easily. A hair, a fiber, a fleck of dried material trapped in the seams of a machine. The science is simple in spirit, a comparison. This matches that, and even when the result is inconclusive, it changes the tone of your questions, because the story is no longer floating. It is anchored. This is the part people misunderstand about investigations. They think there is one big moment where the detective shouts the truth and everyone claps. Real investigations are built out of small moments where the suspect realizes you are not leaving. You ask again, gently, about the argument, about the last sighting, about the time. And this is where the disappearing act often fails. Not because of science, but because of memory. People do not remember clocks. They remember feelings. They remember the cold air when they stepped outside. They remember the way the rain sounded against the window. They remember the song that was playing, the one that now makes them tense. So when someone lies about time, they forget to lie about weather. They forget to lie about light. They say it was dark when it was not. They say it was sunny when it rained. They place a moment in the wrong part of the day because they are thinking in scenes, not hours. You check her timeline against the boring facts. Sunrise, sunset, weather reports. The neighbor's doorbell camera that caught nothing dramatic, just a car pulling in at a time she claimed she was alone. Doorbell cameras are another one of those quiet witnesses. Everyone installs them for package thieves. Nobody expects them to become a murder timeline. The angle is wrong, the image is grainy, the audio is mostly wind. And yet, they show what they show. A car arrives, a trunk opens, someone carries something heavy. Not clear enough to identify, but clear enough to feel wrong in your stomach. The woman keeps insisting her partner left. She keeps insisting he is the kind of man who disappears when angry. And maybe he was. People do that. People leave. People sleep on couches, or stay with friends, or drive around to cool off. But you are looking at the total picture, and the picture is too still. Eventually, the story breaks in a way stories often do. Not with a confession, but with a contradiction. She repeats a detail, but changes it without noticing. She says he took his phone. Then she says she found his phone on the counter. She says he grabbed his jacket. Then you find the jacket hanging in the closet, pockets empty, sleeves still damp from an old rain. These are not forensic miracles. These are human fractures. The weird method, the idea of vanishing without going far, relies on the world not caring. It relies on people shrugging. It relies on the belief that adults can disappear, and nobody will push. But the world does care sometimes. Not quickly, not always, but sometimes. And the cases that do get solved often do not get solved because the killer was brilliant. They get solved because the killer was tired. Tired people make small mistakes, and small mistakes are what patient investigators collect. You turn another page, another attempt at disappearing. This one with a flourish. A man fakes a bus ticket purchase, leaves it on the counter like a prop, tells friends he is starting fresh in another state. He even mails a postcard to himself, dated from a city he has never visited. It is almost admirable in the way a child's magic trick is admirable. The confidence, the commitment. But then you check the bus route. You check whether that ticket number exists, whether it was used, and you learn something criminals hate. Modern systems are boringly precise. Tickets are scanned. Cameras exist, not because anyone is watching, but because everything is recorded by default. The ticket was never scanned. The bus driver never saw him. The camera at the terminal shows a person who looks like him, standing near the kiosk, buying something, then leaving. Not boarding. Congratulations. He staged a departure, but forgot the part where departures are tracked. You see the pattern now. Disappearing is not a single act. It is a long performance, and long performances are hard to sustain when your audience is paperwork. You glance at the clock on the wall. It ticks in a way that makes time feel thick. This is how investigations feel. Time like syrup, slow and heavy, making everything you touch stick. And once you're settled into the hum of the night, you can start with the simplest trick criminals love: trying to vanish without going far at all. Because once you have watched a few failed disappearances, you start to see the next move coming. When running does not work, when hiding is too tiring, people try something else. They try to make the scene itself tell a different story. They stage. Staging is where anxiety puts on a costume and calls itself strategy. It is also where you start to see the difference between real chaos and performed chaos. You arrive at a house that looks like it has been turned inside out. Drawers pulled open, cushions flipped, a lamp on the floor, shade bent like a broken collar. The front window is cracked, and there is a rock on the living room rug, placed like a punctuation mark. The first officer says, "Robbery." It makes sense in the shallow way things always make sense at first. The place is a mess. The window is broken. The wallet is missing. But you do not believe in first impressions. You believe in second looks. You step carefully. The air is stale, warmed by a heater running too high. It smells like dust and something faintly sweet that might be air freshener or might be panic. You look at the window. The glass is broken inward. That is normal for a thrown rock. But the rock itself is clean, too clean. It has no dirt on it, no street grit. It looks like it came from a decorative garden bed, rinsed off, carried inside like a piece of evidence planted by someone who watched too much television. Then you look at the curtains. They are not disturbed the way they should be if a person climbed through. They hang straight, their folds unbroken. You feel the shape of the story the scene is trying to tell you. It wants you to imagine a stranger, a sudden intrusion, a random violence. But random violence has a texture. It is messy in a different way. Real burglars do not usually take time to create atmosphere. They move fast. They grab what they can. They do not stage lamps. Staged mess has intention. It has composition. You kneel near the drawers. They are open, yes, but the contents are not scattered the way a frantic search would scatter them. The socks are still folded. The papers are still stacked. It is like someone opened everything and then forgot to commit. Congratulations, you have found the first sign of a lie. Not in words, but in clutter. You walk into the bedroom. The bed is neatly made, corners tight, pillows aligned, but the nightstand drawer is yanked open and the jewelry box on top is empty. This is another staging habit. People assume burglars want jewelry, and they do sometimes. But burglars also want cash, electronics, firearms. They want easy. They want portable. So you look around. The television is still there. The laptop is still there. The game console is still plugged in. The expensive watch on the dresser is untouched. Only the jewelry box is empty. Only the items that would support a robbery narrative are gone. You do not need a lab for that. You need common sense and a tired brain that has seen the same script performed in different houses. You talk to the homeowner. They are crying, but their tears come and go like a faucet. They tell you they came home to this horror, that they cannot believe it, that the world is unsafe. You nod because you are not here to argue with feelings. You are here to test stories. You ask what was taken. They list the jewelry, the wallet, a small amount of cash. You ask about electronics. They say, oddly, that the burglar must have been scared off. That is possible. Things happen. A neighbor interrupts. A dog barks. But then you check the broken window again. There is glass on top of the rug fibers, not pressed into them. That means the rug was placed after the glass fell, or the rug was disturbed after the break. You look at the rug edges, slightly lifted, as if someone rolled it back, broke the window, then rolled it forward again to catch the mess. Staging is often like that. People try to control the mess. Real intruders do not control the mess. They create it and leave it behind. You call for photographs, not because you are excited, but because you want the record. The record is what you will look at later, when the scene is gone and your memory is unreliable. That is another boring truth. Investigators do not trust their own brains. Brains are storytellers. Brains fill gaps. Brains want conclusions. Evidence does not. Then you do what always feels like the slowest part. You inventory. You list what is present. You list what is absent. You note the oddities. Too neat here, too messy there. You listen to the house, not for ghosts, but for inconsistencies. And you find the next quiet clue. The back door. It is unlocked. The homeowner says the burglar must have found a key, or picked the lock, or forced it, but the lock is not damaged. No fresh scratches, no bent metal, nothing. So you check the dust on the threshold. It is thin and even, untouched. If someone had entered through that door, they would have disturbed it. They would have left a footprint, even a partial one. Instead, the dust is smooth, like time itself laid it down carefully. Congratulations! The door was unlocked because someone who lived here unlocked it. You continue gently. You ask where they were during the window of time. You ask who else has access. You ask about recent arguments, money troubles, insurance. And there it is. Insurance. Staged burglaries often orbit money. Not always. Sometimes staging is emotional, a way to hide a domestic incident. But often, it is financial. Desperation dressed up as victimhood. You pull records, claims history, past reports. You learn the homeowner filed a claim 2 years ago for stolen tools, another, one last year for water damage. Patterns are a kind of fingerprint too. They think their weird method is smart. Scatter drawers, break a window, file a report, get a check. But the system that pays claims also keeps records. Boring records. Patient records. You do not need to be dramatic. You just need to connect the dots and wait for the story to collapse under its own weight. And often, it collapses in the smallest way. A neighbor who says they heard glass break at 3 in the afternoon, not at midnight like the homeowner claimed. Or a camera that caught the homeowner carrying a rock from the backyard. Or the fact that the glass pattern does not match the narrative. You file your report. You write it in plain language. You do not call them a liar. You list observations. You let the facts do the accusing. That is how this work stays calm, even when the subject is ugly. But staging is not always about money. Sometimes it is about guilt. Sometimes it is about love, twisted into something sharp. You open another file, a different house, a different kind of performance. The scene is staged as a suicide. A note on the kitchen table, a careful placement of pills, a glass of water beside them like a prop in a play. At first glance, it seems tidy, almost respectful. The note is written in neat handwriting. The words are simple: apology, farewell, regret. But you have learned to distrust neatness in tragedy. Real grief is messy. Real last moments are rarely composed. You look at the note. You do not read it for emotion. You read it like evidence. The ink is consistent. No pauses, no tremors. That can happen, sure. But then you notice something else. There are no indentations on the paper beneath, no pressure marks where the pen dug in. It is as if it was written on a hard surface elsewhere, then placed here. You check the pen. The pen is capped, placed carefully beside the note. People who are about to die do not always recap pens. They do not always tidy their own scene. You look at the pills. The bottle is wiped clean. Too clean. Even people who wash their hands leave something behind. Skin oils, smudges, a little life. The glass of water has no fingerprints where you would expect. It has prints, but not in the right place. It has been handled like a delicate object, not like a thing someone grabbed while panicking or crying. Staging is a choreography. The choreographer is often too calm. You ask about who found the body, who entered first, who touched what. The answers come quickly, too quickly, like they were waiting to be said. Then you do the quiet, grim work of verification. You check the victim's stomach contents if an autopsy is done, to see if pills were swallowed. You check for residue. You check for signs of restraint, of struggle, of something that does not fit the gentle note. And sometimes you find it. A bruise in a place that does not make sense. A tiny hemorrhage in the eye. A broken blood vessel. A sign that the story is wrong. It is never one clue. It is a collection, a careful pile of, this does not fit. You see how the method that looked clever at first becomes clumsy under light. The person who staged the scene wanted a clean ending. But death is rarely clean, and science is rarely fooled by cleanliness. Because science does not get bored by repetition. Humans do. Humans want to move on. Science is happy to test again. And when the room won't cooperate, the next trick is to tamper with the thing that seems most certain: identity. Identity is supposed to be the one thing that stays put, the anchor at the bottom of the paperwork ocean. Your name on a lease, your face on a license, your fingerprints on a glass you didn't mean to touch. It's comforting, in a grim way, that a person can't usually peel themselves off the world like a sticker. So, when somebody tries, it always comes with this quiet little arrogance, the belief that the system is a single door, and if you pick the lock once, you're free. But the system is not a door. It's a hallway. It's a long corridor of clerks, databases, old forms scanned crooked, and tired people who notice when something feels off. You see it first in the simplest identity trick: the borrowed name, a cousin's name, a dead friend's name, a name found on a lost wallet, like a lottery ticket. You're sitting in an interview room that smells faintly of disinfectant and old carpet glue. The fluorescent lights don't flatter anyone, least of all the person across from you. They tell you they're new in town. They say it casually, like it's a shield. No local connections, no history, nothing to check. Congratulations, you've just been invited to check everything. You start with what's boring, because boring is where lies get tired. You ask for an address, a phone number, a date of birth. You ask the same question twice in two different ways, like you're just making conversation. And that's when the first crack usually appears. Not a dramatic one. A small slip, like a shoe on a wet curb. People who are pretending to be someone else can memorize the headline facts. Name, date, a story about why they moved. But the details that make a life real? Those are harder. The middle school name, the first job, the street they grew up on, the way they pronounce a local town, the one outsiders always say wrong. You keep your voice even. You let them talk. You let the room do what rooms do, pressing gently on the edges of their story. Then you do what investigators do when a story tries to float away. You tie it to something heavy. You run the name through records. You check motor vehicle files. You check old citations. You check whether this person ever existed in a way that leaves dust in a file cabinet. Sometimes the name comes back clean, too clean, and too clean is its own kind of dirty. A real person leaves little stains everywhere. A late fee, a clinic visit, a library card, some ancient apartment application with a blurry photocopy of an identification card. If you find nothing at all, it's not proof, but it's a smell, like bleach at midnight. This is where the weird method starts to look clever from far away, because a borrowed identity can work for a while, especially if nobody looks hard. A landlord wants rent. A job wants hands. A bar wants a card that looks about right under low light. But you're not checking under bar light. You're checking under the cold sun of administrative reality. And administrative reality loves one thing above all: consistency. The first time you see it, it's almost funny. A man gives a name that belongs to his cousin. Not his dead cousin, not his estranged cousin. His cousin who lives 3 counties over and has a very normal life. So you call that cousin. The phone rings. Somebody answers, confused and polite, holding a baby or stirring a pot of something. You ask if they're sitting in your interview room right now. There's a pause. Then the cousin laughs because it's absurd. Then the cousin gets quiet because you don't call with absurd questions unless something is wrong. And you can hear it. That moment, a family realizes their name has been used like a tool. The man in your interview room keeps his expression steady, like a person holding a heavy grocery bag and pretending it isn't cutting off circulation. He tells you it's a misunderstanding. He tells you he was just helping his cousin. He tells you anything except the truth. But the paperwork doesn't care what he tells you. Paperwork cares what matches. You pull signatures, the application he filled out for housing, the signature on a receipt, the handwriting on a form. Handwriting analysis isn't magic, and it isn't always courtroom clean. But it's another comparison, another quiet hinge. You line up letters like you're lining up footprints. The same loop on the same letter. The same heavy pressure at the start of a word, like the pen has anger in it. The same habit of crossing a letter too far to the right. Humans repeat themselves, even when they're trying not to. And that's the theme with identity fraud, the part criminals never really understand. If you're using a false name, you have to remember the lie every time. Every traffic stop, every phone call, every form at a clinic, every time a board clerk asks you a question that seems harmless. Stress is where people forget their own scripts. Stress makes them reach for whatever is familiar. And what's familiar is their real self. So you lean back in your chair, not dramatically, just enough to let silence do its work. You ask them to spell their name. Most people don't think spelling matters, but spelling is muscle memory. It's the way your hand learned it in second grade. Under pressure, your mouth tries to say what your body knows. Sometimes you see it a fraction of a second. Their eyes shift. Their lips part like they're about to say their real name, the one that sits at the bottom of their throat. Then they correct themselves. Too late. You heard it. The room heard it. Congratulations. You've just met the truth, trying to escape. Then there's the other identity trick, the one that's less theatrical and more pathetic. The favorite fake name. The one they use everywhere because it worked once and they can't stop themselves. You'll see it in a stack of reports, months apart, different towns, the same alias, same date of birth, same story about being in construction, being between jobs, being just passing through. The criminal thinks this consistency makes the lie stronger. It doesn't. It makes it searchable because detectives talk. Even when the bureaucracy tries to keep them in separate lanes, they call each other late at night. They swap small details, not the headline, but the odd thing. The phrase somebody used, the unusual tattoo described, the way a suspect always claims to be from the same city. And eventually, the pattern lights up like a weak bulb in a dark hallway. You'll have a moment in a quiet office where you're staring at a name on a screen and thinking, I've seen this before. You can't place it, and that bothers you. So you dig, you pull older files, you search the alias, and there it is. Same fake name, used 2 years ago in a theft report, used again in a domestic disturbance, used again in a fraud case. Like the person can't help signing the same wrong autograph. That's how you catch a lot of them. Not with a single genius move, with the slow realization that liars are lazy. Now and then, identity tampering gets more ambitious. Somebody tries to swap bodies, not literally in the horror movie way, but on paper. They want a dead person's clean slate. They want to be reborn in the system. It usually starts with an obituary, a death notice, a stolen social security number lifted from paperwork that should have been private. And for a little while, it can look like it works. A new line of credit, a new apartment, a new life built on someone else's absence. But the dead have one habit that's hard to fake. They don't do anything new. So the moment a dead person suddenly applies for a loan, or opens a phone account, or enrolls in services, the system twitches. Not dramatically, just enough to flag, just enough to add a note, just enough to create the kind of record investigators love, the kind that says, quietly, someone looked at this twice. If you've ever watched the administrative side of law enforcement, you know it's not glamorous. It's forms, it's phone calls, it's waiting for a fax that arrives crooked. But it's also the part that makes weird methods fail. Because the more complicated the lie, the more places it has to fit. And lies don't like corners. Corners expose seams. Sometimes the identity trick is physical. It's someone trying to alter the body's signature. A cut on a fingertip, sanding ridges down, burning off prints with chemicals they bought like they were cleaning a sink. It's a special kind of optimism, thinking you can edit your own biology with a hardware store plan. You'll see it when you bring someone in, and their fingerprints don't scan clean. The machine rejects them over and over, like it's offended. You look closer. Their fingertips are scarred in a way that doesn't match work, not the smooth calluses of labor, something more deliberate. Patterns interrupted by shiny, healed damage. If you're new, you might think, problem. No prints, no identification. If you've been around, you think, gift. Because scars tell stories. And deliberate damage tells a story with a guilty tone. You take photographs, you document. You ask casually, what happened? The person gives you a story about an accident, a kitchen mishap, an old injury. Maybe. Sometimes people do get hurt. Sometimes they work with tools. But here's the part that gets them. Fingerprints aren't just the pads of fingers. They're also palms. They're also the edges of hands. They're also the way someone touches things without thinking they're touching them. Even if someone ruins their fingertips, they still leave palm prints on glass, on doors, on countertops. And palm prints can be compared. They have creases. They have ridge detail. They have geometry, like a map of a place you've lived your whole life. So the weird method, the sanded fingertips, is less like deleting evidence and more like moving it to a place the suspect didn't think about. You also have other anchors, old booking photos, tattoos, scars, dental work, the particular way someone's ear folds, the shape of their nose from a side profile camera. People forget how many times they've been seen. They think identity is one thing, like a name, but identity is a chorus. It's 10 small features singing the same song. And even when you can't get a print, you can often get a history. You can pull photographs from prior arrests if they exist. You can compare facial features, the spacing of eyes, the angle of cheekbones. It's not perfect, and it's not always decisive on its own. But investigations rarely are. They're stacks, they're piles, they're weight added until the story can't lift itself anymore. You learn to treat identity like a sweater with loose threads. You tug gently and you see what unravels. Then you come to the cases where identity tampering isn't about hiding the suspect. It's about confusing the victim. The old trick of making a death look like someone else's death. The idea that if you attach the wrong name to the wrong body, the world will stop looking. That's the kind of plan that sounds clever in a late-night fantasy and collapses under daylight because bodies have their own identification, and it's not sentimental. Teeth, bone structure, surgical implants, old fractures healed crooked, even the serial numbers etched on certain medical devices. A person can steal a wallet. Sure, they can plant identification near a scene. They can dress someone in different clothes and hope the first glance becomes the final conclusion. But the autopsy doesn't care about planted identification. The autopsy reads the body like a record, and the body is stubborn. Dental comparison, for example, sounds almost quaint, like something from an old crime novel, but it's still powerful. Teeth survive things that burn paper. Fillings and crowns have shapes, materials, histories. Dentists keep charts. X-rays exist, sitting in clinic systems with dates and notes. So if someone tries to pass off a victim as someone else, they are betting against dentistry, which is a strange bet to make. If you think about it, you can almost hear the disappointment when the results come in. Not dramatic disappointment, the tired kind, the kind where a detective rubs their eyes and says, "Yeah, that's what I thought." Because the weird method always has the same flaw. It assumes the investigation stops at the surface, and your whole job is refusing to stop. You keep moving through the files, and you start to see how all these identity tricks blend into the next category. If you can't convincingly become someone else, maybe you try to become no one at all. No name, no prints, no trace. That's when the cleaning starts. That's when the gloves come out. That's when someone decides they're going to beat science by treating their own life like a crime scene, wiping down every handle, bleaching every floor, washing every shirt twice. This is the part where people start using the phrase "no trace," like it's a spell, like words can change physics. You step into a room where someone tried to do it right. They tried to erase themselves. The air is sharp with chemicals, the kind that bite the back of your throat. It smells like a motel pool, like fresh paint, like panic pretending to be hygiene. And the first thought that comes to you is not, "Wow, they cleaned well." It's, "Why does this place smell like it's been scrubbed at midnight?" Because normal homes don't smell like that. Normal mess has layers, dust and cooking and laundry soap, and whatever candles somebody impulse bought to feel like a better person. Overcleaning flattens those layers. It makes a house smell blank. And blank is suspicious. You walk slowly. You look for the small failures that always happen when a human being tries to outwork reality. They wiped the countertops, but forgot the underside of the table edge where fingers curl. They bleached the floor, but missed the baseboard seam where liquid can settle like a secret. They cleaned the sink, but didn't think about the drain trap where residue can linger. You see it in bathrooms a lot. People think a bathroom is the perfect place to destroy evidence. It has water, it has cleaners, it has drains, but drains are collectors. They don't delete things, they hold them. You take samples, a swab along the drain lip, a scrape from the trap, a small cutting from fabric that looks too freshly laundered. This is where you translate the science into something human. Forensic testing, in these cases, is often about finding what doesn't belong. blood. Yes, even diluted, biological material that reacts when treated with certain chemicals. It's not a magic reveal. It's a set of reactions, a confirmation that something organic was here, even if somebody tried to bully it into leaving. And there's a dark little joke investigators tell, quietly, when they see a scene that reeks of bleach. If you can smell the cleaning is the evidence. Because bleach isn't subtle. It leaves its own signature. It changes the color of fabrics. It weakens fibers. It leaves a pattern of damage that doesn't match normal household use. A person spills bleach sometimes. They splash a bit in a laundry room. They wipe a counter after raw chicken. But they don't usually bleach door handles. They don't usually bleach light switches. They don't usually bleach the inside of a car trunk. So when you smell it everywhere, you don't think tidy person. You think person who needed something gone. Then come the gloves. Everyone loves gloves because gloves feel like control. Gloves feel professional. Gloves feel like a movie where the killer is calm and clever. In real life, gloves are just another object you have to deal with. Gloves tear. Gloves slip. Gloves get taken off and shoved into pockets. Gloves get thrown away and then recovered in a trash pull, damp and ugly and full of the very skin cells someone was trying to hide. And even if gloves work perfectly, there's still transfer. There's still contact. Trace evidence is the quiet villain in the no-trace fantasy. Hair, fibers, skin cells, dirt from a specific place ground into a shoe tread. A pet hair that follows you everywhere because your cat thinks you belong to it. You don't have to explain trace evidence like a lecture. You just have to show how it behaves. You pick up a towel from a bathroom where someone cleaned up. It looks innocent. A plain towel, slightly damp, folded too neatly. But towels are greedy. Towels grab everything. They trap hairs. They trap skin. They hold on to tiny flakes like they're collecting souvenirs. So you bag it, you label it, you send it off. The lab won't romanticize it. The lab will do what it always does. Examine, compare, confirm. They'll look at fibers under a microscope, and the fibers will look like strange little ropes. They'll compare them to fibers from other locations. They'll find a match that doesn't look like destiny. It looks like math. Structure, color, composition. And yes, sometimes they'll find something biological, something that survived all that bleach because bleach doesn't always penetrate. It damages and dilutes, but it doesn't always erase. People don't like that truth. They want the world to be clean when they need it to be clean. But the world is stubbornly textured, and sometimes the weird method is the opposite. Instead of over-cleaning, they try to contaminate. They try to flood the scene with other people's traces. They invite friends over. They throw a party. They let everyone touch everything, hoping the evidence becomes noise. It's a method that sounds smart if you believe investigations are solved by a single hair. If you think detectives stroll in, pluck one strand, and announce a name, real investigations don't work like that. Noise is annoying, sure. It slows you down. It adds paperwork. It muddies comparisons. But patterns still exist inside noise. If someone claims they were never in a room and their trace is on the inside of a drawer that only gets open in private, that matters. If their DNA is on the adhesive side of tape used in a restraint, that matters. If their fibers are woven into a knot that was tied tight, that matters. Context is everything. Trace isn't just what is present, it's where it's present. A party can put fingerprints on a countertop. It doesn't usually put them under a bed frame. It doesn't usually put them on the inside of a trash bag tied right after something heavy went in. So you let them throw their party. You let them create their noise. Then you put on gloves of your own, not because you're dramatic, but because you have to. You document. You collect. You separate what's ordinary from what's intimate. And that's another quiet truth. Criminals rarely understand the difference between ordinary contact and intimate contact. Ordinary contact is touching a doorknob, leaning on a counter, sitting on a couch. Intimate contact is the kind that happens during a crime. Gripping, dragging, binding, cleaning. Intimate contact leaves different marks, different transfer, different pressure. You can't always see it in the moment, but you can often reconstruct it later, like reading the wrinkles in a shirt and guessing how it was worn. Then there's fire, the old favorite. If you can't clean it, burn it. You arrive after the smoke has settled, when the air still tastes like wet ash. The house stands there, blackened, windows blown out, the inside exposed like a peeled fruit. Arson is one of those crimes people believe is the perfect eraser. Flames devour, smoke obscures, water from hoses floods and ruins. But fire investigations exist for a reason. Fire has patterns. It moves like an animal, following fuel, climbing walls, leaving lines where it licked and where it starved. A person can set a fire, but they can't easily control how it tells the story. Investigators look for burn patterns, for accelerants, for points of origin. They look for what shouldn't be there: a gasoline smell where there was no reason for gasoline, a pour pattern like someone drew with invisible ink. And even if the fire destroys a lot, it doesn't destroy everything evenly. Metal survives. Some bone survives. Some objects are stubborn. Sometimes the fire actually preserves things in a strange way. A safe might protect paperwork. A drawer might shield a corner. A body might be too damaged for some answers, but still yield others. Dental work again. Implant serial numbers again. The quiet persistence of the physical world. The weird method fails because it treats destruction as deletion. But destruction is just another event, another layer to interpret. Then you get to the part that always feels the most mundane: the trash. So much of criminal behavior ends up in a bin, because bins are where humans put what they don't want to think about. We're trained from childhood, throw it away, and it's gone. Out of sight, out of mind. But trash is not gone. Trash is waiting. You can build an entire case out of what someone couldn't be bothered to keep. Receipts, packaging, cleaning supplies bought at an unusual hour, gloves with one finger torn, a roll of tape missing a length, a box cutter snapped in half. You do a trash pull sometimes, and it's as unglamorous as it sounds. Bags split, liquids leak, the smell is thick and sour, and yet, in that mess, you find the boring truth that breaks a clever method. The suspect bought bleach at 11:30 at night. They bought heavy-duty contractor bags. They bought a plastic drop cloth. They bought it all in one trip, like a person shopping for a project. Normal people don't do that often, not in that combination. And even if they pay cash, there are cameras. Not dramatic cameras, just the kind every store has, recording endlessly because storage is cheap and nobody trusts anybody. You watch footage that looks like every other footage, grainy, too bright, aisles like tunnels. There they are, pushing a cart, face half turned away. They think the hat helps. They think the angle saves them. They think if they don't look at the camera won't see them. Cameras don't work like people. Cameras don't get embarrassed. Cameras don't look away. You pause the frame. You zoom. You don't always get a face, but you get posture. You get gait. You get the way they hold their shoulders like they're carrying something invisible. And you match it later to other footage. Another store, another day, same walk, same tilt of the head. That's how no trace cases become trace cases. Not with a single microscopic miracle, but with the slow stacking of ordinary things. Then come the questions criminals never think to ask themselves. What about my car? What about the trunk latch? What about the floor mat? What about the spare tire well where things fall and stay? Cars are small worlds. People live in them. They eat in them. They shed in them. They wipe them down sometimes, but never perfectly. And cleaning a car too well is just as suspicious as cleaning a house too well. You open a trunk and it smells like citrus cleaner and damp fabric. The carpet liner looks newly scrubbed, fibers stiff. The spare tire well has a thin film of moisture, like someone rinsed it and hoped it would dry before anyone noticed. Congratulations, you found a person who believed in shortcuts. You swab seams. You lift the liner. You look under plastic trim pieces where liquid can seep and hide. You check for transfer on the underside of the trunk lid, where hands press when lifting. And you remember, even if someone cleans, the cleaning itself leaves evidence. They used a towel. Where is it? They used water. Where did it go? They used a vacuum. Where is the bag? It's never just the scene. It's the aftermath of the aftermath. This is the part where you start to understand why forensic science feels slow to people outside it. Because it is slow. It has to be. You can't rush a comparison. You can't rush a chain of custody. You can't rush the dull, careful work of making sure your proof is real and not just a feeling. Feelings are common. Proof is rare. And yet, criminals love the no-trace fantasy. They love the idea that if they clean hard enough, the universe will shrug. So you keep reading, keep turning pages, and you hit the cases where the weird method is abundance, not cleaning, not burning, drowning the scene in something else. Bleach? Yes, but also pepper, also gasoline, also animal blood bought from a butcher. Things meant to confuse. You can tell when someone used pepper, even before you see it. It sits in the air like a sneeze. It clings to your nose. It makes your eyes water. The idea is simple. Dogs track scent. Pepper disrupts scent. Therefore, pepper defeats dogs. That's the kind of logic that sounds good in a frantic brain. But it ignores the reality that tracking dogs are used alongside other tools. And handlers know tricks. Dogs can work around irritants. Investigators can follow other leads. Also, pepper doesn't erase the person's route. It just adds pepper to it. So now you have a trail that smells like pepper, leading from a back door to a car. You have cameras in the area. You have tire impressions in soft ground. You have a witness who remembers someone coughing. Because pepper isn't subtle. Criminals always forget that weirdness attracts attention. If you do something strange, it stands out. A person running down the street is one thing. A person running down the street leaving a cloud of pepper is memorable. Then there's the gasoline trick or the cologne trick, trying to mask scent. It works the same way. It announces itself. Masking doesn't create absence. It creates presence. So you document it. You take samples. You note the smell. You note the attempt. And attempts are interesting because attempts imply consciousness of guilt. Most innocent people don't try to chemically redefine a room. You take all of this and you file it under the same calm lesson. You can scrub a surface, but you can't scrub a routine, because routines are what bring people down. They clean the house, but they keep going to the same gas station. They bleach the bathroom, but they keep texting the same friend at 2 a.m. They burn the trash, but they still use their own car, with their own license plate, on roads with their own cameras. They want forensic science to be a single monster they can outsmart. It's not. It's 1,000 small clerks, and 1,000 small methods, and 1,000 small things that behave predictably, which brings you gently into the next file category. The ones where the person doesn't try to erase evidence at all. They just try to move it. Distance has always felt like magic to criminals. The idea that if you take something far enough away, it becomes someone else's problem. Another town, another county, another state, another set of detectives who don't know your face, don't know your name, don't know your habits. It's a comforting fantasy. It's also one of the oldest mistakes in the book. You feel it in the way cases are labeled. Different jurisdictions, different report numbers, different formatting on the paperwork, different codes, different jargon. And yes, that fragmentation can slow things down. It creates gaps, it creates delays, it creates what people sometimes call jurisdiction fog, like the truth gets lost in the seams between maps. Criminals count on that fog. They count on paperwork sitting in separate stacks, never compared. Sometimes, for a while, they're right. You're standing in a small precinct office that smells like stale coffee and damp wool coats. Someone drops a thin folder on your desk. Found property, unidentified remains. Something that should belong to someone but doesn't. The report is plain. A body found near a county line. No identification on it. Clothes common, nothing distinctive. The kind of case that can slide into the quiet back shelves if nobody grabs it and refuses to let go. But then another call comes in from a town an hour away. Another body. Similar condition, similar placement, similar little details. A bootlace tied in a particular knot, a strip of duct tape with the same brand pattern on the weave, a plastic bag of the same unusual color. These are the anchors that distance can't dissolve, the little choices criminals make without thinking, the weird, personal touches that feel insignificant to them. You start putting the files side by side. You don't need a big board with string like a movie. You need a desk, a lamp, and the willingness to compare. One odd item repeats. The same kind of gas station receipt found nearby. The same snack wrapper. The same brand of cheap energy drink, the kind sold mostly in certain regions. You ask yourself the tired detective question. Why this? Why here? Why the same thing twice? Then you look at the roads. The boring roads. Highways are confessional booths for criminals. Toll readers, license plate readers, cameras at exits, gas stations with surveillance. Little towns with one main road and a police car that notices unfamiliar traffic People think they can move evidence across distance invisibly, but travel is a transaction. You leave traces just by moving. You stop for gas. You buy a drink. You use a restroom. You get caught on a camera holding a door. You throw something away in a bin that later gets searched. Even paying cash doesn't save you, because cash still puts you in a place at a time. And places have cameras now like they have dust. So you build the travel timeline the way you build any timeline, patiently, backwards and forwards. You find toll records if they exist. You find a plate hit on a reader near a bridge. You find a convenience store camera frame where the same vehicle appears in the background. You match bumper stickers, a dent on a rear panel, a missing hubcap, little imperfections that function like fingerprints for machines. Cars have identities too. People forget that. And then there are phones. Phones are the great betrayers, the little glowing companions people can't stop carrying. A person can decide to be careful, but they rarely decide to be lonely. Even if they leave their phone at home, that decision becomes suspicious when you compare it to their normal behavior. If someone always carries their phone and suddenly there's a perfect gap during the window of a crime, that gap has weight. If they carry a burner phone, the burner phone has its own pattern. It still pings towers. It still moves through space. It still behaves like a small animal leaving tracks. So you map movement, not as a cinematic chase, but as a slow line on a map. This is where distance-based crimes become less romantic. It's not a clean escape. Criminals also forget about the small anchors of travel, the predictable route, the same rest stop, the same brand of cigarettes, the same late-night snack. You'll hear it in interviews. Someone says they were nowhere near that town. They've never been there. They have no reason. Then you pull a loyalty card hit from a gas station, or a camera clip, or a toll record, or a witness who remembers them because they complained about the coffee being cold. The witness doesn't remember their face perfectly. Witnesses rarely do. But they remember attitude. They remember tone. They remember the feeling of someone being out of place. Again, feelings matter. Not as proof by themselves, but as guides to where you look. Then you get the cases where the evidence itself travels, like a parcel someone tries to mail away from their life. It sounds ridiculous until you see it. A weapon tossed in a river 2 counties away. Clothes dumped in a landfill outside the city. A bag dropped in a donation bin in another town. Like charity will cleanse it. You have to appreciate the strange logic. If you place the object somewhere anonymous, it becomes anonymous. But rivers have banks. Landfills have logs. Donation bins have pickup routes and cameras in parking lots. And objects don't become anonymous. They become relocated. So you treat the object like a witness who got moved. You ask where it's been, what touched it, what environment altered it. A gun in water will rust, but rust takes time. A gun in water will collect algae, but algae patterns can suggest how long it sat. Clothing in a landfill will pick up specific debris, specific fibers, specific smells. It's not always enough to solve a case, but it's enough to build a story with direction. That's what crime scene work often is. Direction, not certainty, not instant answers. Direction and the weird methods criminals use tend to give you direction, even when they're trying to hide. Sometimes, especially then, because hiding is behavior. Behavior is trackable. You sit with these traveling cases long enough, and you notice the human habit behind them. The desire to hand the problem off, to make it someone else's file number. Distance is emotional. It feels like relief. But the truth is, distance mostly buys time, and time is not the same thing as safety. That's why the next strategy is always waiting, not moving, not running, not cleaning, just waiting for the world to get tired. And the world does get tired. That's the worst part. People forget. Headlines fade. Detectives retire. Evidence sits in boxes with labels that curl at the edges. Criminals rely on that. They rely on human attention being fragile. They think time is a lock. They think if they can just make it to next month, next year, 10 years, the door will close behind them. But time is not a lock. Time is a hallway, a slow one. And cases can walk back down it years later with a folder in hand and a fresh pair of eyes. That's what you learn. Sitting in the evidence room, the air cool and dry, shelves stacked with brown boxes that look identical until you read the small handwriting. Some of those boxes haven't been opened in years. They're quiet, they're patient. They're waiting for the day someone decides the old case deserves another look. Sometimes that day arrives because of technology. A new test becomes available, a better database, a stronger ability to compare tiny things. Sometimes it arrives because of people. A witness finally talks. A suspect gets arrested on something else, and their DNA is collected. A family member finds old letters in an attic. And sometimes it arrives because a detective can't let go. The case sits in their head like a pebble in a shoe. It doesn't hurt enough to scream about. It just hurts enough to keep them limping back to it. You open one of those old files, and the paper feels softer than it should, worn by time and handling. The photographs have that faded color, the kind that makes everything look like it happened in a dream. The weird method in this category is always the same. The killer did nothing flashy. They just relied on delay. They relied on the world moving on. They kept their head down. They stayed quiet. They didn't reoffend, at least not in a way that got noticed. They let the noise of life cover them. For a while, it works. And then something small happens. A traffic stop in a different state? A routine arrest? A cheek swab taken because policy is policy. No drama, just procedure. The DNA goes into a database where it sits like a new book added to a library. Nobody reads it right away. It just exists. And then, one night, a match pings. Not loudly, just enough to create a notification, a line on a report that makes someone sit up straighter in their chair. It's never as cinematic as people imagine. It's an email, a printout, a phone call that starts with, "You're not going to believe this." You pull the old file, you compare identifiers, you check chain of custody, you verify the match because you don't trust miracles. Then you feel the slow weight of it. Time didn't hide them. Time just held them in place until the system caught up. That's the quiet poetry of forensic persistence. The boring work keeps working, even when nobody is watching. And the killer, who thought they were safe because the case went cold, suddenly has heat again. The cooling off illusion is real, not just for serial offenders, but for anyone who commits a crime. And they think attention fades like a bruise. And yes, attention fades, but records don't fade the same way. Records sit. Records wait. Records can be pulled back out when the right name or the right sample appears. You'll see it in old interviews too. how time changes the way people talk. In the beginning, everyone is sharp. They remember where they were, what they wore, what they ate. Years later, they remember feelings instead. They remember that it was a cold spring. They remember the smell of cut grass. They remember being afraid. Some suspects rely on that. They rely on witnesses becoming soft around the edges. They rely on the confusion of memory. But physical records stay surprisingly steady. Phone logs, employment records, old receipts, old photos, sometimes even old voicemail messages saved by someone sentimental. A suspect might forget their own lie. The records will not. And that's why waiting games fail in the end. Not always. Not in every case. There are unsolved crimes sitting out there, like dark houses on quiet streets. But waiting is not. Waiting is just hoping the world won't circle back. Sometimes the circle is slow. Sometimes it takes decades. But circles have a way of closing. A case will reopen because a detective is cleaning out a storage room and finds a box misfiled. A case will reopen because a new supervisor asks, casually, "What are our old unsolved cases?" And someone points. A case will reopen because a victim's family never stopped calling. Not angrily, just steadily, like a clock that won't quit. And when it reopens, the weird method of time becomes the suspect's enemy. Because time changes more than memory. Time changes relationships. A person who was loyal 10 years ago might not be loyal now. A friend who kept quiet might be divorced, broke, angry, or simply tired of carrying someone else's secret like a stone in their pocket. People confess to strange things in strange moments, not because justice suddenly matters to them, but because they want relief. They want the stone out of their pocket. You'll be sitting at your desk when the call comes in. An older voice? Hesitant. The kind that clears its throat too much. They say they saw something years ago. They didn't think it mattered. They were scared. They were young. They were told to forget it. But now, they can't forget. You listen. You take notes. You ask careful questions. You don't judge them for waiting, because judgment wastes time. You just want the detail, and there it is. A small detail that doesn't sound like much. A specific vehicle, a phrase someone used, a location where something was buried. Congratulations! Time has just handed you a key. Then you go back to the old file and you reread it with that new detail in mind. It changes shape. It gives meaning to something that looked irrelevant. Maybe the suspect mentioned that phrase in an old interview, offhand. Maybe a vehicle was noted by a neighbor but dismissed. Maybe a search area was never checked because resources were thin. That's how cold cases thaw. Not with a dramatic new villain, but with a small piece clicking into place. And when you do finally bring the suspect back in, years later, you see what time did to them. They look older, of course. Everyone does. But they also look settled. They built a life on top of what they did, like laying carpet over a stain and hoping nobody ever pulls it up. They sit across from you in the same kind of room, same harsh lights, same stale air. They act offended that you've interrupted their stability. They say, "Why now?" They say, "You have nothing." They say, "This is harassment." But you have something they didn't account for. You have the fact that time didn't erase evidence. It preserved it. You have the fact that time didn't erase records. It stacked them. You have the fact that time didn't erase human behavior. It revealed patterns. And you have the fact that people eventually talk. The suspect's confidence is always interesting at this stage. They often think the case being old makes it weak. They think juries won't care. They think evidence is stale. Sometimes they're right, and that's the ugly part. Sometimes time does make prosecution harder. Witnesses die, memories blur, evidence degrades. But sometimes time does the opposite. Sometimes it makes the evidence cleaner in a way, because the noise of the initial chaos is gone. What remains is what was documented, what was saved, what was tested. And that's when you see the real engine of justice. Not speed, not drama, persistence. It's the slow siege against lies and alibis, carried out by people who keep showing up to work. That's why, in the middle of all this waiting and distance and identity games, you find yourself grateful for the simplest thing in the world. Objects. Because objects don't get defensive. Objects don't change their story. Objects don't call a lawyer and suddenly remember a different timeline. Objects just remain what they are. And there is a strange comfort in that. If you let yourself feel it, you step into an evidence room, and it feels like a library where every book is heavy, boxes stacked in neat rows, tags with dates, shelves that smell like cardboard and plastic and old dust. Somewhere in here is a shoe. Somewhere is a key ring. Somewhere is a receipt folded into a tiny square. Somewhere is a map with a crease line that tells you how it was held. These are quiet witnesses. They don't speak. They don't need to. They wait until someone asks the right question. You pull a box and open it, and inside is a set of keys. Ordinary keys, the kind anyone could have. But the tag lists, where they were found, when, and in what context. Keys are honest in their own way. They tell you what a person could access, what doors they could open, what locks they thought mattered. A suspect might claim they never had a way into a house. Then you find a copied key in their drawer, cut at a hardware store on a random weekday. Hardware store records can exist. Cameras can exist. But even without that, the key itself is a confession. It fits. It turns. It opens. That's the kind of proof that doesn't care about feelings. Then there are shoes. Shoes are storytellers. Souls collect the world. They pick up grit and pollen and tiny stones. They wear in patterns that match how someone walks. You take a shoe impression from a scene, and it looks like a simple shape in dust or mud. People think it's useless because it doesn't have a name on it, but then you compare it to a suspect's shoes. Tread pattern, yes, but also wear. A missing chunk, a unique cut. The kind of damage that happens when someone steps on a nail years ago and never replaces the shoe because they're stubborn. That's how a shoe becomes a signature. You can explain it gently, not as certainty, but as comparison. This matches that. This is consistent with. This excludes others. And all the while, the criminal's weird method, the gloves and bleach and distance, is being undermined by an object that simply did what objects do. Then you have receipts again, the little paper ghosts. A receipt is boring until it isn't. A timestamp, a location, an item list. Someone says they were home all night. But their card was used at a 24-hour store across town at 1 in the morning. Or their phone was recorded near a toll booth. Or a receipt is found crumpled in their car for duct tape and contractor bags. It's not that receipts are magical, it's that people are predictable. They buy things when they need them. They buy them near where they are. They keep the receipt without thinking. And criminals, under stress, often buy like amateurs. They buy everything at once, like a shopping list for panic. Then there are notes, not dramatic ransom notes usually, just notes, scraps of paper with addresses, phone numbers. A note can be the hinge of a case, because a note is intention written down, and intention is hard to explain away. You find a scrap in a pocket, a rough map, a time written next to a name, a license plate number scribbled like someone was trying to remember it, and suddenly the case has a direction again. That's why when you hear about criminals trying weird methods to outsmart forensic science, you keep coming back to this calm reality. Forensic science isn't a single trick. It's 1,000 comparisons grounded in ordinary life. And ordinary life leaves ordinary objects everywhere. The killer can try to be unusual. They can try to be clever, but they still live in a world of keys and shoes and receipts and habits. They still touch things. They still go places. They still buy coffee. They still throw things away. And those quiet routines, those quiet objects, keep telling the truth long after the drama fades. So you stay with it. You stay in the slow hallway. You keep opening boxes. You keep looking twice. Because somewhere in the evidence room, under fluorescent hum and the smell of cardboard, there's always one detail waiting to be noticed. The kind of detail a tired person missed the first time. And when you find it, it won't feel like lightning. It'll feel like a small click, like a lock turning the way it was always meant to turn. And the case, patiently moving forward again. The thing about that click you're waiting for, it's usually attached to something humiliatingly ordinary. Not a secret code. Not a cinematic revelation. More like a clock that's wrong. You slide a plastic bag across the evidence table, and inside it, there's a cheap digital alarm clock, the kind with a red glow that makes a bedroom look like an emergency. It was recovered from a scene where someone insisted they were asleep the whole time, never left the house, never heard a thing. And you can already feel the lie trying to settle in the room, like dust, because the clock is set to the wrong time zone. Not by a minute, not by daylight savings confusion, by exactly an hour. The kind of hour you get when you drive east and your phone updates automatically, but your cheap alarm clock doesn't. The kind of hour that says, gently, you weren't here. Not the whole time. You think a clock can't testify. Wrong. A clock is a witness that doesn't care who you are. And this is why the evidence room is so comforting in its own grim way. It's full of objects that don't perform. They don't stage themselves. They don't cry on cue. They just sit there, holding on to the physics of what happened. Holding on to friction, holding on to time. You work a case like that, and you start to understand how often people get caught by their own boring belongings. The stuff they don't even respect enough to lie about properly. A key is another example. You've held a lot of keys in your career, enough to know they all look the same until they don't. Someone swears they never had access to the office where the cash box went missing. They say it with that offended tone, like you insulted their honor. Then you open an evidence envelope and there's a small, silvery copy key with a hardware store stamp on it. Not the original. A copy. That matters because copies have a story. They're made somewhere by someone at a time. Sometimes there's a record. Sometimes there's a camera. Sometimes there's just a clerk who remembers the guy who kept looking over his shoulder while he waited. Even when there's no record, the copy itself is an admission. It exists because the door mattered to you. Congratulations, you didn't just steal something. You planned for it. And plans are easier to prosecute than accidents. But the really strange criminal methods, the ones people whisper about like folklore, often revolve around this idea that forensic science is fragile. Like it's a delicate little flower you can crush with one clever trick. They'll say things like, he beat the lab, or she outsmarted DNA. Most of the time what they actually did was exploit delay. They created a gap between event and examination. They used time like a dirty blanket. You see it when someone commits an assault outdoors, on a windy night, in a place that rains hard. They think weather is a get-out-of-jail-free card. And yes, rain can wash away a lot. Wind can scatter trace. Sun can degrade biological material. Nature is a sloppy janitor, but nature also leaves its own records. Mud can keep impressions. Wet soil can hold shoe patterns like soft wax. Water can move fibers, sure, but it can also deposit them in odd little pockets, like the crease of a fallen jacket. And rain, ironically, often makes people more memorable. A witness might not remember a face, but they remember a person without an umbrella, walking too fast, soaking wet, angry at the sky. That's the trick with outsmarting forensics. You don't defeat science by being clever. You delay it by being lucky. And luck has a short attention span. You're reminded of that when you're called to review an old burglary series that went nowhere. The original reports are thin. A few forced doors, a few homes missing jewelry and cash, victims describing someone in dark clothing, which is about as useful as describing water as wet. The interesting part is what the burglar did. They wore overshoes, not just boots. Overshoes, the rubber kind you slide on to keep your feet dry. They'd come in, take what they wanted, and leave almost no usable impression because the tread was generic, a smooth pattern, nothing distinctive. The burglar probably congratulated themselves for that. But overshoes squeak. That's the thing they never picture in their fantasy. Rubber on hardwood, rubber on tile, rubber on laminate. It makes a sound like a cheap balloon being rubbed between hands. It's subtle, but in a quiet house, it's a bell. A neighbor hears it through an open window. A homeowner remembers it after the fear fades. Someone says, it sounded like wet boots inside. So you circle back, because that detail didn't fit with the original theory. If it was a random smash and grab, why the careful footwear? If it was a professional, why the squeaking overshoes that announce your presence? You pull one more report from a town 2 counties away, and there it is again. The squeak. The victims describing it without realizing they're describing the same person. Like the crime has a soundtrack. You don't solve that series with DNA. You solve it with routine traffic stops. Because people who wear overshoes for burglaries still drive cars with burned-out taillights. They still roll through stop signs when they're tired. They still get pulled over for boring reasons. And when an officer looks in the trunk and sees a pair of rubber overshoes, still damp, still smelling like someone else's floor cleaner, you get your pivot. Then you start looking at the shoes inside the overshoes. The real shoes. The ones the criminal thought would never matter. Those can have unique wear. Those can have a pebble embedded in the tread. Those can have a missing chunk that matches a partial print left when the overshoe slipped for a second at a back door. A weird method undone by a small failure of grip. You see that theme again and again. People try to outsmart science by adding a layer. Gloves, overshoes, plastic wrap on door handles, a hoodie pulled low. It's all layers, but layers slide. Layers create new mistakes. Gloves are the classic one, and criminals have a special belief about gloves. They believe gloves mean no fingerprints, and no fingerprints means no case. Like fingerprints are the only currency investigators accept. But gloves leave their own prints sometimes, especially textured gloves. A cheap dotted work glove can leave a repeating pattern in dust, like a fish scale grid. A leather glove can leave a smear that tells you pressure and direction. And glove use often creates something better than a fingerprint, because gloves don't just hide skin. They also change how you move. You grip harder, you fumble, you drop things. You find it in a staged scene, a fake break-in, where the suspect insists they never touch the window. No fingerprints, but the broken glass on the outside sill has a clean, curved wipe mark, like a glove brushed it away. You can almost see the anxious little motion, the person thinking, "Careful, careful," while doing something that would never happen in a real break-in. A real intruder doesn't stop to manicure the sill. They climb, they cut themselves, they swear under their breath, they leave little crescents of blood that soak into wood grain, and wood grain is greedy, like towels. It keeps what you give it. That's why staging is so exhausting to do well. You're not just making a mess, you're simulating panic. And panic is hard to fake because it doesn't follow a script. Which brings you to one of the strangest things criminals do when they're trying to beat forensic work. They try to create a different kind of panic. They call it misdirection. You call it politely making your own life harder. You'll see someone scatter animal hair around, thinking it will confuse trace analysis. Or they'll smear grease on surfaces, thinking it will prevent clean prints. Or they'll dump cleaning powder everywhere, hoping it ruins the scene. All it really does is give you more to sample, more to compare, more to photograph, and more opportunities for the offender to make a mistake. Because the offender is not a lab technician. They're a stressed out person in a room, doing too much, too fast. They're trying to juggle their own fear, and fear makes your hands clumsy. You can hear it in the way scenes look. Too many footprints, too many hand marks in the wrong places, too much activity around one object, like a body or a safe, and not enough around the exits. They're so focused on the centerpiece. Edges are where cases live. The inside of a doorway, the hinge side, the latch, the deadbolt, the door frame, where someone grips for leverage and leaves skin cells, even through gloves, because gloves don't cover wrists perfectly and sleeves ride up when you struggle. You collect those edges, and you let the lab do the slow part. The lab has its own rhythm. People outside think the lab is a wizard tower, Inside, it's more like a bakery at dawn. Quiet, repetitive, methodical, lots of labeling, lots of waiting, instruments humming like tired insects, people in gloves and coats doing careful things that don't look dramatic but decide futures. And the most boring truth of all is this: most weird methods don't defeat forensic science. They defeat impatient investigators. They slow down the first look. They don't survive the second look. That second look often arrives in the form of a comparison that feels almost childish, like matching socks. You have two pieces of duct tape in two different cases. Both were used as bindings. Both were torn, not cut. And torn tape has a signature. The tear edge is irregular, like a coastline. If you have the roll or another piece torn from the same roll, you can sometimes match those coastline edges back together. It's called a physical match, and it feels like a puzzle piece click, not a metaphorical click, a literal one. The edges align in a way that makes your brain relax, because the world has rules again. A criminal thinks duct tape is anonymous because it's common, but duct tape is manufactured in batches. It has fibers in the weave, adhesive composition, even microscopic tool marks from the serrated edge of a dispenser. Two pieces can whisper to each other across cases saying, "Same origin." Then you look at who buys that brand, in that area, in that time. You look at store inventory. You look at receipts if you get lucky. Or you look at the suspect's garage, where there's a half-used roll with the same wear, the same tear habit, the same little kink where someone always pinches it. People have habits, even in how they tear tape. Congratulations, your personality just testified. You see similar work with zip ties. People love zip ties because they feel modern and clean, a neat restraint compared to rope. And zip ties are cheap, easy, disposable. But zip ties also have lot numbers, sometimes packaging that gets thrown away, and distinctive widths and head shapes that can be traced to brands. Some are sold in big box stores. Some are industrial. Some come from specific workplaces. If you find an unusual type at a scene, you start asking boring questions about who has access. Electricians, warehouse workers, certain factory jobs, people who handle inventory. Again, it's not magic, it's narrowing. And narrowing is how you beat weird methods. You don't need certainty on day one. You need to shrink the world until the offender is no longer hidden inside it. Sometimes that shrinking comes from the quietest object of all, paper. Not a dramatic note, not a confession letter, just an appliance manual left on a counter, or a warranty card torn open, or a shipping label on a box that didn't get broken down properly. People order strange things when they're planning, and they forget that packaging is loud. A person might buy a specialized tool for a crime, thinking the tool will be the only important part. But the packaging has barcodes. The packaging has store stickers. The packaging has a date in the form of a shipping label. And the box itself might have a fingerprint on the tape seam where they peeled it back with their nail. The nail is another quiet witness. Under fingernails, you can find skin, fibers, soil. Victims sometimes scratch. Offenders sometimes break nails while forcing a window or wrestling with a stubborn lock. It's all so unromantic, so physical. Movies make crime clean. Reality makes it tactile. Now, While you're sitting with that tactile reality, you start noticing another kind of strange method offenders use. One that doesn't involve bleach, or fire, or rubber overshoes. They try to weaponize bureaucracy. They think if they complicate the paperwork, they complicate the truth. They'll report false tips. They'll call in sightings of a missing person in 3 different towns. They'll use burner phones to flood a hotline. They'll claim the victim had secret enemies, secret affairs, secret debts. They want the investigation to become a junk drawer full of unrelated objects. And, to be fair, it sometimes works for a while. Not because investigators are fools, but because time is finite. Every tip takes effort. Every lead costs hours. Every hour is a chunk of someone's life. So you learn a skill that isn't forensic, but is just as important. Triage. You sit with the tip list and you sort it not by how exciting it sounds, but by how verifiable it is. Can you check it with a record? Can you check it with a camera? Can you check it with a timestamp? A caller says they saw the missing man at a diner at 2 in the morning. Fine. Does the diner have receipts, cameras, staff schedules? A caller says they heard the victim was dealing drugs. Fine. Is there any evidence of that in phone records, contacts, prior arrests, financial flow? Rumors are cheap. Verification is expensive. And expensive is where you spend your energy. That's another reason weird methods fail. They're built on the assumption that investigators will chase drama, that they'll chase the most colorful theory, that they'll burn out. But experienced investigators don't chase color. They chase what can be checked. You've seen too many cases turn on a detail that would make a novelist yawn. A parking receipt, a toll record, a time-stamped photo someone took of their lunch, not realizing their location. Services tagged it. A work badge entry at a building that proves someone wasn't where they claimed. People forget that modern life is a trail of small permissions you give your devices. You allow your phone to remember. You allow your car to log. You allow your job to track when you enter and leave, because that's how you get paid. Criminals are still human. They have the same devices, the same habits, the same convenient little betrayals in their pocket. Now and then, the weird method is a deliberate attempt to exploit that digital world. Someone tries to frame another person using their phone. They take a victim's phone and send messages to create a false, still alive timeline. They post on social media. They pin a location. It looks clever until you remember. Phones record more than messages. They record how they're held, moved, unlocked, connected. A message sent from a phone doesn't mean the owner sent it. It means the phone sent it. So you look at the metadata. You look at what network it used. You look at what device accessed the account. You look at whether the phone's movement patterns make sense. If the victim's phone suddenly moves across town but connects to the same home wireless network, congratulations, the phone never left. Someone just wanted you to think it did. If the account is accessed from a new device, you look at that device. If the device is associated with the suspect, the method collapses into something almost embarrassing, like forging someone's signature, but forgetting you did it in your own handwriting. Even with older, simpler cases, you see the same thing in analog form. Someone tries to fabricate an alibi with a time-stamped purchase, so they buy something at a store and keep the receipt. They hold it up like a shield. But a receipt is a narrow kind of proof. It proves you were near that register at that moment. It doesn't prove you were there before or after. It doesn't prove you didn't hand your card to someone else. It doesn't prove you didn't leave and come back. So you widen the lens. You check cameras. You check the parking lot. You check nearby toll readers. You look for the car. You look for whether the person who claims to be buying a soda is also buying time. This is what real investigation feels like. Most nights, not heroism, not chases, just widening and narrowing, like breathing, but with paperwork. And then, after all that widening and narrowing, you get those moments where an object speaks louder than all the talk. A map, for example, an old paper map found in a glove compartment. People laugh at paper maps now, but paper maps have one advantage. They hold on to touch. You can see the creases where someone folded it over and over, focusing on one corridor of roads. You can see a smudge where a finger traced a route. You can find a circle in pen around a remote area, a place someone didn't want to forget. A person can claim they've never been there, but their map says they studied it like a bedtime story. Then you do the quiet follow-up. You go to that circled place, not with sirens, with daylight and boots and a shovel, if you have legal authority and a good reason. And sometimes the ground tells you what the person couldn't keep buried. So yes, objects don't lie, but they also don't interpret themselves. You have to show up. You have to connect them. You have to keep your mind steady enough to see what matters. That steadiness is what criminals underestimate. They imagine you'll get distracted. They imagine you'll get tired. They imagine you'll accept the easiest narrative and move on. Sometimes agencies do, because resources are limited and people are human. But when a case is worked properly, with patience, weird methods start to look like what they are. Anxiety, dressed up as innovation. That's the running joke, the sardonic little lullaby of the job. The offender thinks they invented something. You've seen it 3 times already, maybe 5. They stage a break-in, but forget that broken glass has directionality. They clean with bleach, but forget bleach has a smell that screams through drywall. They wear gloves, but throw the gloves in their own kitchen trash. They dump evidence in another town, but stop at the same gas station chain along the way, leaving a camera trail like breadcrumbs. They try to be invisible, but keep living like themselves. And that brings you to another quiet object that ruins a lot of weird methods. The humble receipt's louder cousin, the bank statement. People love cash in their criminal fantasies. Cash is anonymous, they think. Cash is freedom. Cash is also inconvenient, and most adults can't live in cash forever without it looking strange. Landlords want consistent payments. Employers want payroll. Utility companies want their money in predictable ways. If someone suddenly switches to all cash, it can be a flag all by itself. You'll see it in fraud cases especially. Someone steals an identity, opens credit, then tries to cash out quickly. They buy gift cards. They buy prepaid debit cards. They buy easily resellable electronics. They believe they found a loophole. Gift cards feel like cash but with less trace. Except gift cards have serial numbers. Gift cards have activation records. Gift cards get used somewhere at some time, often on camera. And when you trace usage, you can work backward from the moment they tried to turn stolen value into real value. It's like watching someone try to pour water through a funnel and acting shocked when you notice the splash. So, You request the records. You wait, because waiting is part of the job. You get the spreadsheets, lines and lines of purchases that look like boredom in numeric form. Then you find a pattern. The cards were used at the same store or online, shipped to the same address, or used to buy gas at the same pumps, in the same area, always around the same time of night. People outsmart systems and then behave like clocks. And clocks are the easiest thing in the world to predict. The reason you can do any of this, the reason you can look calm while someone's method falls apart, is because you're not competing with the offender's imagination. You're competing with their consistency. That's why the evidence room is not just storage. It's a memory that doesn't sleep. You'll stand there sometimes in that fluorescent hum looking at rows of boxes, and you'll realize how many cases are decided by whether someone preserved one small thing correctly. A cigarette butt in a bag, a swab dried properly, a shirt sealed and labeled, a knife stored without contamination. Chain of custody is a dull phrase, but it's sacred. It's the reason you can stand in court years later and say, this is the same item from the same place, handled by the right hands, in the right order. Criminals don't think about that. They think about cleverness. Investigators think about continuity, and continuity is stronger than cleverness. So you keep working through the next cluster of files in your mind, still in that object-focused mode, and you notice how often weird methods are really just misunderstandings of how evidence behaves. Take blood, for example. People think blood is a simple thing. It's red, it drips. You clean it, it's gone. Blood is actually an entire language, and most criminals are illiterate in it. A drop falling straight down leaves a different shape than a drop flung sideways. A smear from wiping looks different than a smear from struggling. A pool on a floor tells you how long something sat there and whether the body moved before or after. The edges dry in a way that can suggest timing. The pattern can tell you if someone tried to clean, because cleaning makes feathered edges, diluted streaks, and that telltale too uniform look. You don't need to drown the listener in jargon. You just need to know the basic truth. Liquids remember motion. So when someone stages an assault to look like it happened in one room, but the blood language says it began in a hallway, you follow the hallway. You follow the story the liquid tells, because it's not trying to protect anyone. And here's the part criminals really hate. Even when you clean blood, you often just spread it thinner. You take a concentrated truth and you smear it across a wider area. Then you leave cleaning swipes. Then you leave towel fibers. Then you leave your own footmarks in diluted stains you didn't notice under bad lighting. You can turn off the lights and still see what you need sometimes, because labs have tools for that, not magic tools. Just honest tools. Alternate light sources can reveal staining. Chemical reagents can indicate presumptive blood presence. Confirmation tests can follow. It's step by step, boring, careful, procedural. A weird method like wash the whole floor becomes an advantage for you because it tells you where the offender's panic traveled. It shows you which areas they cared about. People clean where they fear. They don't clean randomly. You see this with vehicle cleaning too. Someone cleans the trunk obsessively, but leaves the driver's seat alone. They're thinking about the object they transported, not the fact that they sat there sweating afterward, leaving skin cells on the steering wheel, leaving transfer on the seatbelt strap, leaving a smear on the door handle. The car becomes a diary of their afterthoughts. And once you see it that way, you start to understand why weird methods don't last. They're too focused on one kind of evidence, one kind of fear, one kind of cinematic clue. Real cases are ecosystems. Pull one thread and 10 more move, which is why you keep coming back again and again to the same steady comfort. The work is slow. The work is ordinary. The work doesn't get dazzled. You're not trying to be smarter than the criminal. You're trying to be more patient than their anxiety. And anxiety is impatient by nature. So you keep your questions simple, you keep your voice calm, you keep your reports plain, you do the comparisons, you look at the clock that's wrong, you look at the key that fits, you look at the tape edges that match, you look at the receipt that proves a purchase, you look at the shoe that walked through wet soil and carried a tiny stone from a place the suspect never went. Then you let the story collapse without pushing it, because that's the secret, the one people don't talk about much. Most cases don't end with a dramatic reveal. They end with a person realizing the world kept better notes than they did. They realize it in small stages. First, they get quieter. Then they get angry. Then they get tired. You've watched that tiredness settle in interrogation rooms like dust, too. A person who came in swinging with confidence, talking about how science can't touch them, how they were careful, how they watched videos and learned the tricks. Then you show them something banal. A store camera still, a toll record, a printed log of a key card entry, a photo of the trash you pulled, with the receipt for the cleaning supplies. Their face changes, not into fear exactly, into something like insult. Because the truth is insulting when you've built your ego on being clever. And right there, in that insult, you get one more reminder of why these weird criminal methods keep happening. People aren't just trying to avoid prison. They're trying to preserve an image of themselves. They want to believe they're not like other offenders. They want to believe they're special, smarter, more controlled. But crime is rarely controlled. It's messy, stupid, and full of tiny bodily realities. Sweat, skin, hair, fibers, habits, purchases, routes. And those realities don't care about your self-image. You set the file down for a moment, and you feel the quiet continuity of it all. The same lessons, repeated in different handwriting. The same attempts at cleverness, defeated by the same patient attention. Not because the world is fair, but because the world is trackable. And as you prepare to move into the next stretch of this long night of case files, you can feel the weight of the bigger idea sitting underneath all of it. The one investigators learn the hard way. Forensics isn't a single tool that solves crime. It's a habit of mind. It's the willingness to take the boring object seriously, and to keep taking it seriously even after the first look didn't give you what you wanted. Because somewhere in the next box you open, there's going to be another